Today we have, and we are waiting for Jeff. That is our technical difficulty, but hopefully he makes it in here. But with us, we have Veronica, Rick, and Jeff. Veronica is the founder of Pure Organic, an organic snack-based business launched in 2006. The business grew to national distribution, partnered with investors, and expanded its portfolio of products. In 2015, Veronica worked with Random House to publish Pure Food, a seasonal plant-based cookbook. And in 2016, Pure Organic was sold to Kellogg under the Kashu family of brands. For the next 3 years, Veronica worked to transition the brand and lead its continued growth within Kellogg. Today, Veronica works with JPG as a business partner, using her experience and understanding of entrepreneurship to help founders launch and grow progressive new food and beverage companies. Rick, who will be one of our main instructors for this learning series, is a business partner who leads the operation and supply chain team within JPG. Over the past 30 years, he has founded and grown businesses in the food sector, ranging from manufacturing, food ingredients to finished packaged consumer products. His expertise includes strategic planning, executive management, financial and capital management, operations, and business development. Rick also has degrees in business and law. And last but not least, Jeff, who is still looking to join us, is the founder and managing director of JPG Resources and the president of Snackworks. With 3 decades of experience guiding food and beverage brands of all sizes, Jeff understands both the client and co-manufacturer mindsets. JPG Resources now has 3 primary areas of practice and a staff of over 40, with focus areas of strategy and sales, product development, and supply chain. The JPG Resources team is headed by a collection of senior leaders who are results-focused business people with a depth of experience at leading companies, and all have an entrepreneurial spirit that connects with companies at all stages of growth. And with that said, I will let Veronica take it away.
Thank you. Thanks, Alyssa, and welcome everybody. We're so glad to have the opportunity to talk with you today. Today is going to be kind of more conversational and storytelling around my experiences as an entrepreneur and kind of the startup operations that I dealt with. And Rick as well, as he's worked in startup companies and he's worked kind of on both sides. So we're excited to talk through that with you today. Jeff, our wonderful leader, is having some technical difficulties getting on, but he, basically is the one who pushed for JPG to be involved with these sessions because, like Alyssa mentioned, it's a group of amazing experts in the food industry who have just done so much. And what we want to do for startups and for early stage companies is just help them grow and navigate this space. We've been there before, we've done it. So yeah, we're really excited for this. I work at JPG starting a venture called The Garden, which is specifically designed for startups. And we're gonna launch a whole bunch of programming in January. So kind of stay tuned for that. Our goal is to provide a lot of value to startups with not a lot of cost. So that's what we've been working on at JPG. I guess I'll just dive right in with, kind of my story in the food space and the operations. I started my company Pure Organic in 2006. And the inspiration behind that was my daughter, who at 6 years old decided to become a vegetarian. And as a mom, I was struggling to find really healthy, delicious food, especially for her lunchbox. And so I started to make these simple organic bars with fruits and nuts and spices, and would go to the natural food store, which was my first ingredient sourcing, very expensive, and buy these ingredients to put them in her lunchbox. And I realized, well, while I was there and while I was shopping, that there really, at that point in 06, there weren't a lot of bars on the shelf that were simple, that were really healthy and organic and affordable. And also spending a lot of money on ingredients at the natural food store, I thought to myself, is there an opportunity to bring a bar that's made with simple ingredients, that's organic? Organic was just kind of really becoming a buzzword. and affordable to the masses, because everything, it seemed like at that time, was very, very niche. Um, so that was the seed that started to grow in me. And I didn't have a business degree, and I didn't know anything about supply chain and operations. And if you would have asked me or said those words at that point, I wouldn't have even really known what they meant. Intuitively, supply chain, okay. But when you're starting out, it's just about realizing a dream and solving a problem, usually for yourself. And so that was what was foremost in my mind. But I knew that I needed to educate myself. Back then, there were not as many resources, I don't think, as there are today. So that's great for people that are starting businesses. But what I did know is that here in Michigan, where I live, there were a lot of manufacturing plants around that made food. And so I started to call them out of the blue and say, hey, I've got this product. I'm interested in learning more about manufacturing, and if you can make it for me. And most of them were kind of like, wait, what company are you with? What are you doing? And I was like, well, I'm not really a company yet, but I'm looking to learn. As you can imagine, I had a lot of doors closed on me and a lot of like, hey, call me back when you can do 50,000 units at a time. But eventually I was persistent, and I was able to find a manufacturer that was willing to sit down with me. And so I went and I talked to this manufacturer, and this guy basically gave me manufacturing 101. He talked to me about shelf life testing, about ingredient sourcing. He looked at my product and said, these are the types of machines that you'll need to make your product. We don't have it here, but here's some names of manufacturers that could do this. You're going to want to really understand your ingredient costs and what they cost in bulk. Here's the name of some food brokers that can get you started down that path and tell you how much 100 pounds of almonds is going to cost you, and you can start working out your pricing. So that meeting, and throughout my entire career, really learning from people that were experts, was key to all of my successes. I walked into being an entrepreneur without any food knowledge whatsoever. And so to me, that was a huge lesson. Try really hard to get in front of people that are experts and can help you. And so that was my first kind of experience with a co-manufacturer. It took me a long time to find the right co-man because I was small. I wasn't able to do 50,000 bars per SKU per run. But eventually, through persistence, I found a small manufacturer out in Oregon that said, yeah, we'll work with you. We love the products that you're doing. They were very natural and organic minded. And so I flew out to Oregon and shared my recipes with them, which is kind of a scary thing. I mean, Rick is on the line, and now, having been through it, I shudder at some of the choices that I made where, I wasn't signing contracts, I wasn't protecting myself. Those are all things that, as we go through this learning series, will teach you how to do to make sure that you don't skip over those important parts. But regardless, the relationship turned out to be a really good one for my first co-packer. They were very passionate about my product, which was great. They worked with me to scale my recipe. It looks different, obviously, in my kitchen as it does when you're making, thousands of bars. They were able to work with me with smaller minimums that I could afford. And again, they had a team of experts that, as an entrepreneur, I tapped into. I tried to get as much free information from the people around me that I absolutely could. So, I talked a lot with their labeling team on how to create the right nutrition label. I worked with them to find my first food broker to sell my products nationwide. There were a lot of ways that they helped me and they educated me from the get-go. And so, the learning for me there was a good co-manufacturing partner is key, especially in the beginning, and especially when you're trying to kind of navigate the waters. Don't get me wrong, they were expensive. I paid for it, but I had goals in my head of where I wanted my pricing to be in the beginning, and this may or may not have been the right strategy. I had a much smaller margin than any financial planner would have looked at it and said, you're not going to be able to make a business out of this. So I knew it was not really sustainable, but I wanted to get my product launched. I wanted to get out there and then work really hard to get my costs down and get my margin to where it should be. Again, if you can avoid that and from the get-go have your margin structured out the right way, and realize that and not have to work your way into that, that's a better path. But a lot of us entrepreneurs, we kind of build the plane as we're flying it, and that's that I was no different. My co-manufacturer also was very instrumental in helping me source packaging. So part of the supply chain process is, how am I going to package my product? What kind of film should I have it in? What kind of package? What kind of oxygen barrier and light barrier does my product need? They were able to connect me with some outside labs that do this work all the time and can give you a nutrition label and can test your micro and your macro, which is all very valuable information. And then I learned a lot about how to order packaging and packaging minimums and the cost required for that. So I guess in summary with my co-man, which I said kind of in the beginning, is finding the right co-man, finding somebody who's willing to partner with you and almost mentor you in the beginning. That was extremely instrumental to me. And even as I work in JPG and work with a lot of startups, I love to see co-mans, and they're definitely out there, that get really excited about new and progressive food products. And they want to work with you, even if you're not, this big established company, and they love working with entrepreneurs to grow their products and being in kind of on the ground level. So that was very key to me. Designing my first packaging, I'm just looking at some of the topics here. I did this wrong too, which is actually good because it shows you can do things wrong and still come out successful in the end. I called up my buddy from college and I was like, hey, I've got this project. He was a designer. I'm like, haha, free bars for life if it works out. He's like, haha, yeah, I'll help you. So he designed my packaging, and there was no thought really to hierarchy of messaging or popping on shelf or any of those things. It was just like, oh my gosh, that looks great. I love it. I knew that we needed to communicate what the bar was, and some of that stuff intuitively, but we just kind of rolled out with packaging. And I found out 3 years down the road when I had a design company that I was working with sit me down and say, listen, I know this is your baby, but you really need to change your packaging. I listened to them, which was another lesson that I learned along the way, is to listen to people that have more experience and expertise than I do in a certain area, even if it bothers me, and learn from that. And so I said, okay, let's work together. We'll change the packaging. We changed it, and almost immediately our velocities increased about 20%. So good packaging is extremely important, and getting that down from the get-go is, again, a great thing to do, so you don't have to go back and change it. The last topic here, I want to make sure that I'm staying on time, that I have is how I priced my product. I priced it out based on a lot of my learnings from the co-man again. However, in the beginning, I didn't leave enough room for my distributor margin. And that is a very common mistake with startups, especially because you think about shipping it to the retailer or getting it on shelf. And a lot of times when you start small, you're shipping direct. But as you grow, and I've had companies say to me, once we get to that point, we'll make it work and we'll have some, efficiencies, so it'll be okay. That's a dangerous path. You've got to calculate that margin in the beginning, even if you're not using distributors yet. If you want to scale your business, if you want to grow your business, you really have to have that calculated in. And I learned that the hard way as well. When I had a broker say to me, basically like, oh, well, where's your 25% for the distributor? And I was like, well, what do you mean? And I had to go back and rework all of my pricing. And of course, my margin got even worse. So a lot of learnings in those early years. And as my business grew and as I learned and became smarter and surrounded myself with experts and tried to learn from them, I made changes like my first co-man did all of my ingredient sourcing for me and kind of gave me a lump sum, tolling plus ingredients for manufacturing my bar. As we grew, we wanted to own those supplier relationships ourselves. And so we started to, work with co-manufacturers that would let us own the relationship with the almond company and the date company. And in that way, we could negotiate our own pricing. We could get better pricing. We could kind of, take that middleman out of it. And that helped us with pricing and efficiencies down the road. Obviously, starting to understand how to correctly manage inventory and packaging, how much to order ahead of time. Those were all important pieces to the puzzle to getting my margin where it needed to be, where I knew that finally investors would actually look at me and take note and invest in my company, which is essentially what I needed to do to grow it to the next level. I'll stop there and hand it off back to Alyssa and to Rick. I know there's going to be some time at the end for questions. So if you have questions on my experience or challenges that I had, please reserve those and bring them up as towards the end of the session.
Thank you so much, Veronica. That was very insightful. Working closely with people launching CPG brands, you hear it time and time again of just needing to be malleable and like you said, changing your packaging and how much your margin increased and kind of finding that co-man that was passionate about what you do it's like finding sometimes like finding a unicorn. But it's amazing to hear that exists and that's readily available for founders. Rick, also so excited for you to speak with us about your experience around operations. Would love to have you take it away as well.
Sure. Thanks, Alyssa. And thanks, Veronica. That's a great summary there. Well, to begin with, Alyssa let the cat out of the bag. And I can start by saying, hi, my name is Rick and I'm a recovering attorney. So I did practice law long enough to realize I didn't want to be a lawyer when I grew up. But I always had the entrepreneurial bug. And so started a food ingredient business with a couple of partners. We had a proprietary technology for processing mainly grains and legumes into food ingredients. And my experience was much like Veronica's from the standpoint of we really didn't know what we were getting into when we got into it, but learned along the way. And the first thing we learned is that just because we think we have the best things in sliced bread doesn't mean that everybody else does. And we needed to show people how they could use our products in finished food items and had to come up with applications and give them information on how to incorporate them. Fortunately, I'm married to a food scientist who could do those things. So despite the fact that I didn't know anything about food other than eating it, she was really able to take her technical expertise and support our customers and grow our business. So we then had a customer that came to us that was a CPG company. They self-manufactured, but they wanted to get out of manufacturing, focus on their brand, focus on marketing, focus on growing it, focus on innovation. And so they asked us to take over their manufacturing. So we did, and by that decision, got into making finished CPG food products as a co-manufacturer, and grew that business, doing primarily ready-to-eat breakfast cereals and snack items, and bringing on new customers, ranging from emerging young companies, growing brands, to the large multinational CPGs. Our focus was in health and wellness. About a third of our volume was organic certified. So for the large companies, we mainly did products that they could not self-manufacture because of the certifications and requirements needed, and needed someone nimble like us that could do those specialty brands for them. Again, we grew that business and focusing on these niches, and working mainly on products that were rather unique from a standpoint of the certifications, whether it be organic. We did gluten-free cereals. We did special certifications such as kosher for Passover. So a lot of things that others wouldn't do. So focusing on those niches and growing that business. Ultimately, we sold that business about 12 years ago. Kind of hung out my shingles, started consulting with brands, and then joined a young emerging nutrition bar company called Health Warrior Superfoods, and ran operations for Health Warrior through to our exit and sale of that brand to PepsiCo about almost 2 years ago now. Stayed then with the integration of that business into the Pepsi Quaker division, and then jumped on board with JPG to join the team that run operations and supply chain management support for companies. We call it the JPG Wheelhouse, and we have a full team of people with subject matter expertise in all aspects of operations and supply chain, whether it be procurement, logistics, manufacturing, planning, the gamut there, and fulfillment as well. So we do everything from turnkey operations support for emerging brands to filling gaps if people have needs for specific support in their business. So with that, I guess I would just say that my background is such that I've sat on both sides of the table. I've been on the operations side with the manufacturing, and I've been on the brand side. And as you know, Veronica mentioned the importance of her co-manufacturer relationship. It was really key for her growth and success of her company. And I think that a key part of that is making sure that you have the right partner. You know, that most entrepreneurs, most founders didn't found the company because they really wanted to run a supply chain. They wanted to, go forward with their passion, their brand, their products, and grow that business. And so what we can provide is do kind of the backroom, the upstream stuff to support that effort. But it's important that you have the right relationship in that supply chain, and particularly with the co-manufacturer. And we work with manufacturers to have an open, transparent, collaborative relationship, almost a partnership type of relationship with the brand, to assure the success, make sure that each understands the needs of the others, and that the co-manufacturer understands the brand, what you want to be as a brand, and that the brand understands what the co-manufacturer's capabilities are when it comes to product design and growth of the business there. So I guess that's kind of the quick background on me. And with that, I'll turn it back to Alyssa, and we can go on with the discussion.
Yeah, amazing. So true about needing to know exactly what your brand is and what you're trying to do. It's such a essential part of success and partnership with the many cogs in the wheel of moving forward. And then in this section, Jeff, I also can support in this area of asking both of you questions that would help out our entrepreneurs or those that are spearheading a business in the food sector.
Sure. Thanks for having us. Sorry, late getting on here. I had, as you and Monica discussed, and Rick, sometimes we have challenges to overcome. Today, the challenge was Zoom. But I think as we, as you work through your product launches and your relationships with your co-man and distributors, there are always problems. I mean, sometimes the problem is just access and supply, and sometimes it's finding the co-man, sometimes it's finding the materials for the co-man. I mean, Rick or Veronica, maybe one of you can just talk about a couple of those things you had to overcome in your journey as far as things that may be beyond your control that you had to pivot or work around in terms of supply challenges.
Yeah, definitely things, again, like under the topic of things you never think about when you're starting a business. It's like, okay, I've got my formula, my recipe, and this is set, and like, this is what it's going to be. And then all of a sudden, you have a co-man saying to you, or an ingredient supplier saying, we can't fulfill your orders for tart cherries this month. We expected to have a lot more, and the supply is running out, and the crop was really bad last year. And so I learned a couple of things early on. One is you have to make some decisions sometimes on cost and maintaining the integrity of your product. I had investors say to me, just take out a bunch of the cherries and put in citric acid, and you'll save a lot of money. And I felt really bad about that suggestion, because, I just felt like it didn't hold up the integrity of my product, and I didn't end up doing it. And it seemed to them like the wrong decision. Like I should have done that. And it cost me margin, and it cost me money. But you know what, we just, the integrity of the product for our brand was much more important. And so, in that instance, we scrambled, we found secondary suppliers, we found small, expensive amounts of leftover tart cherries from other suppliers. And we spent a lot of money maintaining the integrity of our product. Another issue that we ran into multiple times over the years was nut supply. So one year you'll have an amazing almond crop, and then the next year it'll be terrible. And so before we got to the point of actually contracting with our suppliers to contract a certain amount to meet our forecast, we often found ourselves scrambling based on supply. And so one of the strategies that we had 3 to 4 different types of nuts in our product. We had almonds, we had cashews, we had walnuts, and in some of them we had peanuts if it was a peanut butter flavor. And so we were able to kind of move around those formula percentages within a certain small area so that it didn't change our label, but it allowed us to put a little bit more cashews, a little bit less almonds if we needed to, or vice versa. And that was actually helpful to us on a couple of different occasions. And so just understanding your formula and how you can pivot and mix those ingredients up. Obviously, you can change your ingredient deck, but that brings a whole nother, you've got to change all your wrapping and all of your packaging and all of that. So you don't want to do that. But being able to understand how you can pivot in between ingredients and use different things, I think is important with your formula and when you're thinking about supply and supply changes. And also just along the lines of that, you know, if there are different varieties of the same product that you can use, you know, whole almonds versus half almonds versus pieces of almonds, you know, things like that can make a difference as well. So good things to think about when it comes to your formula and your ingredients.
Well, and you talk about formula quite a bit here, and I know you started out with a co-man who was in a turnkey system. Often when you do that, you end up with the co-man might say they own your formula. So, you know, did you have to go through the process of extracting your formula ownership from the co-man? And then, you know, maybe Rick can talk a little bit about, you know, how sometimes that can be problematic and sometimes it's not so bad. But what I know at Kashi, for example, when I first got involved there, Kashi didn't own any of the formulas. And we had to buy some out. We had to reformulate and move to different co-mans. We had a variety of issues to overcome. Some of them were also not doing what they said they were doing. The products were not what they were claimed to be, and we didn't know that until we really dug in. But what was your experience with formula ownership?
Yeah, that's one of those things that made me shudder. That when I look back, I kind of shudder about that. I did not correctly protect myself. Luckily, the co-man I worked with, you know, had high integrity and was great. But I see this over and over and over again with smaller companies who don't understand what they need to do to protect their recipe and their formula and their intellectual property as we talk about it. And Rick can speak to those steps. I will just say that, you know, even if you bring a formula to a co-man and they're like, well, you know, it's just because of this, it's a little bit crumbly and it's not running really well on our equipment. So we're going to just bump this ingredient up a little bit and this one down. It's going to run a lot better. You know, that those things can be considered changes. And if you're not protected legally, you know, you can get into a dispute of who owns that formula now. So definitely something, again, that you don't think about, but it's very, very important to think about as a startup. Rick, would love to hear your view as a lawyer and as a as an ingredient expert on that.
Yeah, so and you're right on point there. You know, it's really key. And as we establish the relationships between brands and co-mans, this is a key initial discussion that who owns the IP. The brand has to own their formula. And in many cases, you may be relying on the co-man to provide some product development support. They may co-develop the product with you, but even in that instance, it needs to be very clear in your agreement that you ultimately end up owning that formula and can take it with you should you make it a change there. You know, I think that when you talk about the ingredient substitutions, you know, it's also important to understand what are your brand guardrails and what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable there, and make sure that those decisions are being made by you and in concert with the co-man that maintain those guardrails going forward.
And I know during the operations session, a lot of these things that we're talking about today, we're going to do deeper dives into them. And so, like, what do you need in a co-manufacturing contract? What are the sections that you have to make sure you talk about and protect yourself with? So those are definitely questions we hope to answer in the ops session.
Yeah, there's a fair amount of nuance with co-man relationships, and a lot of it is negotiating good contracts so everybody knows what to expect and what to behave or how to behave. Also comes down to having good specifications and good quality manuals and all those things that are a lot of upfront work that a lot of times brands either don't know that they need to do, or founders don't know, or it's hard, gritty work that they, you know, just don't want to engage in, and the plant often doesn't want to engage in either. So it's easier for everybody up front to ignore that, but it almost always leads to issues down the road. Let's talk a little bit. You also mentioned distributors, and you mentioned that a lot of time, and we've seen this over and over and over as well, that brands don't, they're selling direct or they're selling locally. They may even be doing the distribution or delivery themselves, or they're doing only online. and then all of a sudden you go out and you sell into Whole Foods and you don't understand how that works, or you sell into, it could be a regional chain like Meijer. And almost always the brand then has to sell through a distributor to get into the retail environment that they want to be in. So Veronica, you mentioned that, and you mentioned that you also didn't plan for that, which is again not uncommon, and it's just an area that a lot of founders don't realize. How did you select your first distributor then, and how did you ultimately select good distributors, and how did you make those decisions?
Yeah, so my first distributor was KeHE Foods. And the reason was because I kind of got lucky. But once when I launched my product right off the bat, I thought about how can I build awareness around this? And so I called my friend at the Grand Rapids Press and I said, hey, this is what I'm doing. It's kind of an interesting story. And she's like, yeah, I'll write it up. So she wrote it up. It ended up being on the first page of the business section of our largest, one of our largest cities' local newspapers. And the CEO of Meijer, which is a 282 store conventional retailer, very large retailer here in the Midwest, saw that I was launching this organic bar and I had a passion for this healthy, simple food. And he said, he basically called up his guy at KeHE, because KeHE was Meijer's distributor, and said, I want this product in Meijer. So that was a huge win for me and a springboard for my business for sure. But again, a big learning curve. I drove down to Chicago. I met with the KeHE guys, and they taught me a lot about distributor and the distributor margins and expectations and what they do and what they don't do. And my view was, if I'm going to pay them X amount of money to distribute my product, I'm going to get my money's worth. And so I worked really hard to make the distributor work for me. Every distributor has representatives that go into the store and basically say, here's the products that my distributor is selling, and they get paid on the basis of the store buying in products from them. And they'll have shows where you can go and you can showcase your product to all of the distributor representatives. And so when I partnered with KeHE, I went to every KeHE show and made it a point to work really hard to get the KeHE representatives to understand my product, why it was a better product, why they should be selling this in, why it was on trend, and that the retailers would be excited about it. And it worked. I knew that KeHE had 9,000 at that time, had 9,000 doors that they distributed to. And for me, I mean, that was just an amazing opportunity to grow my business. So I really focused on that. And you hear a lot, like you have a love-hate relationship with your distributor at all times. But it really helped me grow my business. And even though you very much have to manage chargebacks and promotions, and it's a lot of management working with a distributor, it's also really the only fast, effective way to scale your business nationally. If you're really looking to scale quickly and go national, they can be tremendous partners. You just have to manage them very, very carefully.
Well, I appreciate that you bring up the love-hate relationship, because a lot of times, it's they're the classic middleman. They are, you can't do without them. But a lot of people, too many people, take the idea that, well, I've signed up this distributor and I'm paying them money and I'm done, and they're just going to go perform for me. Same thing with brokers. Same thing with co-mans. Founders have founders often have a tendency to think this is a transactional relationship that's very simple. And the idea that I'm going to send money and they're going to do a service and done. And it doesn't work that way. For one, there's just too much complexity. For two, Human motivation is not driven by transaction. It's driven by knowledge and engagement and by personal relations and incentives and all those things. And so, you know, you are going to have to work hard to manage your distributor. You're going to have to work hard on your broker. You're going to have to work hard to get what you really want out of your co-man partnership. All those things take time and energy and effort. And again, what we find a lot of times is that founders and young companies in particular, if they don't have experienced people on the supply chain side, all the effort is focused on selling, and raising money. And a lot of this relationship and building the entire supply chain and connecting it all together and communicating clearly and setting expectations and providing the mission and the whole vision for the brand and everything else. Often the supply side doesn't get managed very well. And so I do think that is, that's a great point.
Amazing. I feel like we're scratching the surface to so many topics, and that's just getting me so excited for what we're launching in 2021 with our learning series. And thank you, Rick, Veronica, Jeff. This was so insightful and has gotten me super excited for what's to come in 2021.
Thanks
Great.
for
Thank you.
everybody for joining.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all.